Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Jobin, and you are listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. This podcast is dedicated to helping family caregivers in Ontario. Through expert tips and resources, you will gain knowledge and validation for the ups and downs that come with caregiving. More importantly, you'll learn that you're not alone. It's so important to take this time for yourself. We're glad you're here. Today, we are joined by Wendy Preskow. Wendy is the founder of the National Initiative for Eating Disorders, an all-volunteer, not-for-profit devoted to creating awareness, understanding, and action on behalf of people with eating disorders, their caregivers, and loved ones. She is also a member of the OCO's Mental Health Working Group. She has lived experience in caring for someone with an eating disorder and has used her experience to provide guidance and expertise to others in the caregiving community. Wendy, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We want to create a space on Time to Talk where Ontario caregivers can connect and share. So hopefully through our conversation today, Wendy, we can all gain a little bit more insight into the needs of someone with an eating disorder and what they may require from their caregiver. Every situation is unique, of course, and hopefully some of the topics discussed today will resonate with and help our listeners. So we're so appreciative of you sharing your experience. Wendy, we understand that you are a caregiver for your daughter who has suffered with an eating disorder for quite some time. Can you please describe for us the moment when your role as her mother began to evolve into something more challenging?
It did begin more than 20 years ago when her pediatrician diagnosed her with an eating disorder. And one of the things we have to remember is that more than 20 years ago, there was no Google and the internet was in its infancy. So we had to kind of try and fathom out where we were going to go and what I was going to be doing and how we were going to be dealing with all of this, because we were really completely naive and caught unaware. So the first thing that we did was my husband actually went downtown and he was able to the National Eating Disorder Information Center, NIED.ca, and he was given piles of papers that he brought home, and we started shuffling through those papers to see, where I could possibly find some help or where we could possibly get help other than at her doctor. And I think we have to also remember that more than 20 years ago, the word caregiver was not the buzzword that it is today. I was a mom bringing up 3 healthy, amazing kids, doing the best I could, not realizing how much she was really suffering inside, because eating disorders have deep psychological issues, and we were completely and utterly unaware of all those situations that was going on inside her head that came out later, obviously, through her eventually getting some psychological help.
Wendy, in 2018, a study through the Canadian Journal of Public Health found over 50%, this is a staggering but also not surprising number, of grade 9 and 10 girls are trying to lose weight, with almost all of them considered to be at a healthy weight. And I say that it is a staggering but not surprising number because I think about myself at that age, my friends, my peers. It's certainly something that touched my life then and has done since. So I think your story and these statistics speak to the prevalence of eating disorders in our society. So your journey began in 1999, but the numbers suggest that there isn't much improvement. And I would think that perhaps the problem might have been exacerbated in recent years due to a number of factors. So this lack of improvement in the number of young men and women struggling with weight loss behavior, what do you think that is? And do you have any advice on what parents should watch for, perhaps?
Yes, you're quite right about grade 9, because I think her struggles really began in high school. And for her, it became a lack of identity. Like, who was she? Who am I? And she started comparing herself to everybody else. This one's prettier, this one's smarter, this one, looks so good in those clothes, etc., etc. Really trying to find her own identity as to who she was. And one way that I know just from talking to her honestly and openly is that she became, in inverted commas, the healthy one. She was bringing the healthy lunches to school. She was bringing, eating all the healthy foods. And it turned out that her friends, I think, began to ask her for suggestions on or watching what she was eating. But in the meantime, also, she was throwing one of her friends, and that's how we actually knew this all started, because one of her high school friends came to tell me that she was throwing away her school lunch. So that was also a huge, big red flag. And the numbers have gone up astronomically as far as people suffering with eating disorders. And I'm sure you hear every day the numbers with eating disorders, especially with COVID, has certainly exacerbated the whole eating disorder situation. Eating disorders have also really and truly been the orphan of the mental health system. When people think of mental health, the first things that flash through your minds are, and rightfully so, are depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, and absolutely those mental health conditions are huge. But eating disorders, unfortunately, nobody brings to the table, and it has the highest mortality rate, death rate of any mental health illness. And besides dying from an eating disorder, the other reason people do die from an eating disorder is from suicide, because they have lost hope for help. And I can certainly talk more about, all the things that are lacking in the healthcare system for eating disorders. But as far as the signs that we were blinded by, like totally blinded by, was when she was about 15 or 16 and she wanted to become a vegetarian. And that's a huge red flag. Now, I'm absolutely not saying that everybody who is a vegetarian is going to have an eating disorder. But if you are predisposed, then becoming a vegetarian starts to help you eliminate certain foods from the way you normally are eating. And I was totally on board with her becoming a vegetarian. I thought, okay, if you want to be a vegetarian, be a vegetarian. I didn't think twice what was going on. I had no idea. And then also starting to wear baggy clothing, isolating, not wanting to be with everybody else when we were having family dinners or family meals, just wanting to change my shopping list and scrutinizing labels. All these kind of sort of withdrawing from family events, or just sitting quietly, or covering herself up with cushions, just to hide herself. So I think those are certainly some red flags that when I think back, I can remember and I can understand. But at the time, we were completely innocent and blinded. I think that's the best word for me to use.
That's all great advice, because I can see while those things are gradually happening and you wanting to be a supportive mom, saying, okay, you want to be a vegetarian. Okay, let's do this. But when it becomes more about whether it's vegetarianism or eliminating this kind of food or eliminating this kind of food, when it becomes more about eliminating the possibility of having to eat things versus, another reason for doing those particular styles of eating, it sounds like a major red flag. So I thank you for sharing all of those things. And we wanted to know what kind of supports, if any, you did receive or turn to when you were in these early stages of your caregiving time. I think you've touched on some of this, but did you find that there were not as many supports for caregivers specifically caring for someone with an eating disorder?
Yes, I can honestly say that there is a place downtown called Sheena's Place, and that saved my life. I remember going down there in 1999. I was actually teaching, my background was actually teaching preschool. And I remember there was a group there for moms on a Tuesday, and I literally lived from week to week. As soon as the school bell rang, I was at that door to try and get myself downtown in time for that mom's group, because it was a place of safety. It was a place where it was confidential. I do remember sitting in the groups with the facilitator and her asking all the other moms in the group, how long your loved one had been suffering. And I can remember it like yesterday, sitting there thinking, this one's had her eating disorder for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, in 1 year, we are going to be done with this. This is going to be finished. We are going to be dealing with this and it's going to be over. And unfortunately, I became one of those moms. And really, not much has changed since then. Sheena's Place, it's a free place to go. Now you have to sign up because of, what COVID has done to everything. But before, you could just show up at the door, go and join the group. So first of all, it being free was a huge, big benefit, because my husband was working at the time, and I know this will resonate with a lot of people. When you are employed, and you have $500 for psychological services as an employee, you can literally spend that in possibly maximum 2 or 3 sessions of going to see a psychologist. And that is one thing that honestly should be under OHIP. It should be covered. Why would psychologists not be covered by the healthcare system for people who are suffering with whatever kind of mental illness that they need? It almost keeps people sick, because there are so many families that we could not afford to pay every single week to go and have so much therapy, which she needed so desperately.
This could be an entirely separate episode all in and of itself, because you raised such incredibly important points, and especially what you said earlier as well. Not just about mental health, but within the realm of mental health, why eating disorders seem to be sort of overlooked, and we could bring up a lot of things here. Is it because it is a disease that, while it does affect men, also largely affects women and young women, and that's why it's not perhaps taken as seriously? There's a whole lot of conversation we could have all about that just in itself. And it's so wonderful that Sheena's Place exists and has done such incredible work for so long. And I'm glad you had that support. But since then, you have taken the incredible step and the very generous step of founding the National Initiative for Eating Disorders. So can you tell us about the National Initiative for Eating Disorders and why it is that you founded it?
Yes, actually, towards the end of 2011, I was really getting annoyed or ticked off, to put it mildly, about the lack of help and the lack of services and access to treatment that we were not able to access for her. And I just felt that I had to do something, because I knew that there were going to be hundreds and thousands of other families just like ours going through the same situation with no help, lack of access to treatment, etc., and it goes on and on and on and on. So in 2011, I actually ended up going to our Member of Parliament's office. So our MP had a meeting with us, and I remember taking about 19 or 20 people to his boardroom and sitting around the table and all sharing why we were there. He actually went around the table and asked us why each of us was sitting there. And he was totally blown away by everybody's conversation. And afterwards, I said to him, he asked us if we wanted to say anything more, and none of us, we all had said what we wanted to say. And I had asked him if he wanted to say anything more. And I remember him leaning back in his chair and he said, I'm just completely and utterly overwhelmed. So from his office and from that meeting, we created a steering committee, and we went back to his office 2 weeks later. And then he officially launched us in February 2012, and global news were there. And literally, my son-in-law actually did a 1-page website for us with my name and phone number at the bottom of the screen. And it was on the 6 o'clock news for about 30 seconds, if that. Within half an hour, my phone started ringing with people who were contacting me, and the rest is history. And the first family to ever call me was a family who had lost their daughter exactly a year before by suicide. And it was heartbreaking. And it just went on and on and on. So our organization has really, our logo is awareness, understanding, and action. And we really help raise the bar of awareness, especially for the first 5 years of being created. My VP and myself went to Ottawa about 16 or 17 times in those 5 years to meet with every agency that would actually allow us through the door. And I'm talking about the Mental Health Commission of Canada, Stats Canada, Health Canada, Public Health Agency of Canada, whoever would listen to us so that we could share what was going on with eating disorders. And it took a long while before we got invited to come back to these tables to talk more about mental health and eating disorders, because the general population, I really think, are pretty unaware that eating disorders is a mental health illness. It's nothing to do with vanity. It's nothing that anybody is choosing. You don't wake up and decide you want to have an eating disorder. You are predisposed. And the doctors have told us that 80% of eating disorders are genetic and 20% is the environment. So if you are predisposed, then somehow you're either going to come out, you could talk about drug addiction and substance abuse. These people are predisposed. Something in the environment is going to trigger the illness to really put its bad foot forward. And with our daughter, unfortunately, it came out as an eating disorder.
Over a third of caregivers use their personal finances and savings to pay for the needs of the person they care for. Financial hardships are common when it comes to being a caregiver. Luckily, there is financial support for caregivers through government agencies and community organizations. As a caregiver, you may be eligible for caregiver benefits and leave. The Ontario Caregiver Organization has made a list of financial support and grants. Visit ontariocaregiver.ca for more information. Now, back to our episode.
What resources does the National Initiative for Eating Disorders offer to people that might be seeking help?
I'm kind of known as the point of contact. We have a program, and I guess when people are reaching out for help, then I get phone calls and I get emails from families who are suffering, and it can be anything from siblings call me, grandparents, partners, boyfriends, husbands, everybody call me as to what can they do, and they are, their loved one is suffering with an eating disorder. So I'm not a clinician. I will never ever give clinical advice. But as a mom and as lived experience, I can certainly hear people's crying and listen to them. The biggest achievement that I have felt in my heart, that I have been able to listen to these people and give them some reference as to where they can possibly get help. I have kept a very small, ongoing sort of list of people that I know that are readily available to talk, that I can refer people to for clinical help. Because I don't give any clinical advice. I can sort of help them move to the next step, and hopefully they'll be able to get some help as soon as possible.
That in and of itself, the validation of having someone to listen to and having the initial steps of where do I go, who do I speak to, what do I do? I can imagine that's incredibly helpful to people that are seeking help for their loved ones and for themselves. So we talked about the age at which your daughter began to show the symptoms of this, and we talked about the statistics for grade 9 and 10. Is there a need for more discussion about eating disorders in schools, given all of that?
I think without any doubt, there is. I know there is a NIED.ca, which is the National Eating Disorder Information Centre in Toronto, do go and do programs in schools, which is amazing. But I think it goes beyond that. I really think that teachers, it should be mandatory in curriculum for teachers to learn more about mental health and eating disorders. They are the ones, and our kids are at school for so many hours a day, and they are the ones that are sort of being so aware of and the change of children's, young kids' bodies at that age and going through puberty. And they are the ones that can really be more observant and see what is going on and hopefully hear conversations amongst the students. So I think information needs to be in teachers' curriculums. It should be mandatory for teachers to have some kind of training on mental health and eating disorders. I also think there should be some PD days. And I know I did it once actually with my daughter years ago when she first got sick. There was a guidance counselors had a PD day, and we went to speak, and it was amazing. And the guidance counselors were absolutely shocked as to what was coming out of my daughter's mouth. So I think guidance counselors need extra training. I think teachers need extra training. I think it should be mandatory for PD days to have some kind of a panel for people to come and talk their own lived experience, and for people and for the schools, just generally from elementary school upwards, to be more aware of what is going on with eating disorders, and to stop all this nonsense about good foods and bad foods, to stop all this calorie counting, and for the teachers' own biases to be somehow either not caught up in the realm of, trying to have these children in their classrooms and be comfortable within their own bodies. So I think there's just so much society can do and needs to do, and the conversations that need to change. I don't know how, and I don't know when.
Well, and I know that you say this as yourself being an educator as well. So you have an understanding of the system, but I love the fact that you're mentioning elementary school, because of course, if the problem starts to show itself a little bit later than that, the roots of things have to begin at a very young age. I've heard my own son at the age of 3 and 4 saying, oh, I have a round belly. I have too much food in my tummy. I ate too much. I did that. And that was alarming for me because, he had his cute little toddler toddler body, but he was in school with some older kids that had said some things. So it's so important that we sort of build a healthy attitude and a healthy awareness about food and eating and our bodies earlier on. And so I absolutely am on board with you for that.
Yeah. And that's very interesting that you should say that, because I think my daughter used to say the same kind of thing. I've got my tummy's too big. And kids can be cruel. We have to really understand that, other children can bully and be really cruel to others. And especially, I heard of one who was, kids dressed in snowsuits. A snowsuit is a puffy thing to put on and to wear. And, kids looking at each other in snowsuits can be really miserable and say nasty things to each other. And we have to also realize that, unfortunately, I know with this pandemic as well, that young children have been, in hospital because of eating disorders. And even though they don't have the mental cognition of what is happening to them, they don't understand that it's an eating disorder, at the age of 4 or 5 years old. But not to say it can't happen.
And this speaks to the level of crisis that we're in from a mental health perspective that has only escalated in the last couple of years, and why turning our attention to mental health and prioritizing it along with physical health is so important. So I absolutely agree with you.
You can make a difference in the caregiver community by becoming a volunteer. The Ontario Caregiver Organization is dedicated to providing caregivers the resources needed to help them be successful in their caregiving journey. Becoming a volunteer means you can help support caregivers in a variety of different ways. You can join a working group, an online forum, a focus group, or provide peer support. Volunteers can make a huge difference in a caregiver's life. Become a volunteer today at ontariocaregiver.ca. Now, back to our episode.
Do you find, and have you found, that you have faced any stigma in your caregiving journey with your daughter?
I can honestly say no. I never heard the word stigma said to me. I didn't hear it. I didn't feel it. But I know that it's out there. And I know that sometimes families will not want to talk about it because of the shame and the guilt, and they're embarrassed, and the stigma attached to it. I've never felt that myself, but I know for sure it is out there. And I think just in the mental health system, I don't know who sort of put this word forward that it's a stigma to have an eating disorder. I would interpret it more as people feeling ashamed or guilty. I know in the very beginning when our daughter got sick, it was, what did we do? What did we do wrong? What should we have done? What didn't we do? I remember my husband and I, honestly, lying in bed crying. Like, what have we done? We've got 2 other healthy kids. Where did we go wrong? I think once we had been through therapy ourselves and realized and were able to drop all of these negative emotions about ourselves, we were able to deal and help her. One thing I did not want to do when she was in the early stages of her illness, I did not want her to be labeled as, she has an eating disorder. I was more concerned about sharing what was going on in our family with a small group rather than her being looked up and labeled as, she has an eating disorder. So I think that to me was more of a concern. I don't ever think I thought of that word stigma because I wasn't ashamed, but I know that there are families who are. I think if more people, and maybe this is my plea to caregivers out there, if more people came out and spoke about what was going on with their families, the help and the recognition would be way more embraced than it is today. And I know that when I started our organization, the National Initiative for Eating Disorders, I used to equate it, and I think you can still, to AIDS. And 30 odd years ago, or by now it could be 40 years ago, when AIDS first sort of was spoken about, it was something to be ashamed of. And, oh my gosh, you have AIDS, and I want to go near you. And, all this radical nonsense. And now those who are suffering from AIDS have got every possible treatment and funding and studies available. And I felt that eating disorders were stuck in the closet like AIDS and needed to come out and be exposed. And I really do believe that the more people and the more families that can step up and talk about what is going on in their families and not be ashamed and not be embarrassed and not feel guilty, the more awareness and the more public education will probably happen because of them speaking up. So that has always given me, I guess, it's empowered me. I haven't felt stigmatized.
And I think to your point, once you start creating that conversation, more people get involved, less people feel alone, and it can only help the process of people healing. So absolutely. Now, I know that you said, and this sort of leads into my question because it creates conversation, that you could potentially get advice from other people that have been through this experience. And I know you said that was a little bit difficult, or more than a little bit difficult, to find when you started on this journey. Can you think back to what might have been the best or most useful piece of advice that you received at the beginning of this caregiving journey, or maybe later on, or anything that might stick out to you?
I don't remember. I mean, I know that we were fortunate in finding a dietitian for her that actually had an eating disorder herself, so she could identify and understand, more of the psychological aspect of it. But honestly, I think there are even to this day, to try and find somebody who specializes and helps people with eating disorders is very difficult. Waiting lists are ridiculous. Hospital waiting lists are off the chart. I don't know, this is when I can really go off on a tangent, because you wouldn't expect somebody with cancer, and let's just put COVID aside. Let's not even think about COVID. This eating disorders have been going on for decades before COVID. I mean, yes, maybe the ugly silver lining of COVID is that eating disorders have now come to the forefront, especially with children, and anxiety. I mean, it's gone up astronomically. But prior to COVID, and yes, back to our early days, I know we took her to one psychologist and it did not work out. It took us years to try and find somebody else, other than myself going down to Sheena's place to get an understanding of what this was all about and what was happening to us. But as far as getting her proper help was concerned, wow, I think that only happened when she went to university. And one of the lecturers was a psychologist who she could identify with amazingly. And although she wasn't seeing new clients, her colleague was. So that took a good, probably 5 or 6 years to find somebody who she could eventually get help with. In the meantime, all those years were totally and utterly wasted, because people can and do recover from an eating disorder. They can live an awesome, awesome life. But the sooner you can nip this in the bud, the better. And for the fact that we had to kind of wait all those years to find somebody who could actually treat her and who she could identify with, because that's another huge, big issue. And as we know, maybe the first psychologist you go to is not going to be the one you can relate to or get along with or understands you. And you have to sort of kind of shop around. So it took a good 5 years until she could find somebody who she could relate to.
Well, this conversation has been full of incredible advice from you, but to sum up, do you personally have any advice that you can add to this for someone who is currently caring for someone with an eating disorder and that they might be feeling overwhelmed, or even if someone suspects that their loved one might be dealing with an eating disorder?
Yes. So I'm going to answer your questions backwards. If you feel that there is something that is wrong, follow your gut. As a mom, if you're a dad or whoever you are, if you are feeling that there is something not right, then you need to follow your gut and hopefully get your loved one seen to by a medical professional. As far as dealing with an eating disorder, it is difficult. It can be a very long process. But as I have said before, if you can nip it in the bud by following your gut and getting the right kind of help, then hopefully things can be prevented from taking as long as it needs to get this all sorted out. But one thing I also want to really emphasize is that you are not alone. You can reach out to me. I am so happy to talk to you. I am willing to listen to people. And the other thing that I really highly recommend is that in the very beginning, and just like our daughter as well, she was in denial for many, many years. And the best thing that you can do for yourself is to get help for yourself. And if you have a partner or somebody that you are living with or cohabiting, or whatever terminology you want to use, a husband, anybody, you both need to go, because you and somebody else, or never mind on the same page, you need to be on the same line, on the same page, because there can be so much conflict and so much unfortunate circumstances that can happen from an eating disorder because it can rip a family apart.
Mm-hmm.
And the more help that you can get and the better understanding you have of what is going on with your loved one, the better your own life can be and the more tolerable it can be. So get help for yourself. Email me info@NIED.ca. We do as much as we can to carry on creating awareness, understanding, and action.
Wendy, there are going to be so many people that are thankful for the information that you've given us today. And again, it's incredibly generous of you to be available to them. What we're doing with this podcast is hopefully connecting people or, just making people feel less alone in their journey. So we thank you so much for being a guest here today and for sharing your experiences and your wisdom on the subject.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I just want people to know that I'm real, that I live in real time with what we are going through. And I'm not going to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, but I would do as much as I possibly can to help the next person. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Wendy. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can access more details about support services on our website, ontariocaregiver.ca. Until next time, I'm Michelle Jobin, and you have been listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. We hope you have a wonderful day.